At 11:50 p.m., Chloe Bennett's phone rang from somewhere under a pile of blankets, library receipts, and one paperback. Romance novel, she had sworn. She was not emotionally attached to. She was 25 years old, exhausted, and lying sideways across her bed in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon, still wearing the cardigan she had worn to work that morning. She had spent the entire day proofreading manuscripts for a small publishing house that paid her just enough to survive and not nearly enough to feel like she was thriving. When the phone finally surfaced from the fabric avalanche, she answered without even checking the screen. Her voice raspy with fatigue. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a man's voice, deep and a little unsure, said, "Hey Maddie, I know it's late, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry about earlier. I shouldn't have said that." Chloe blinked at the ceiling. "I think you have the wrong number." Another pause, longer this time, followed by a soft, almost embarrassed laugh. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I must have hit the wrong contact. This is humiliating." "It's fine," Chloe said, smiling despite herself. "Happens to the best of us." "I'm Daniel, by the way," the voice said, as if introducing himself might undo the awkwardness. "Since apparently I've already apologized to you for something you didn't do." Chloe laughed, a real laugh, the first one that day. "Chloe, and for what it's worth, I accept your apology. Whatever it was for." "You're a good sport," Daniel said. "I'll let you get back to your night." "Good night, Daniel." The call ended and Chloe lay there staring at her phone, feeling strangely lighter than she had in weeks. She told herself it was nothing, just a funny little mishap to mention to her coworkers the next day, and she fell asleep with the ghost of a smile on her face. 3 days passed. Chloe had almost forgotten about the wrong number call when her phone buzzed. Again on a Thursday evening. She was in the middle of microwaving leftover pasta when she saw an unfamiliar number, and for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she answered. "Hello? Chloe, it's Daniel, the wrong number guy." She felt a small jolt of surprise. "How did you get this number? I thought this was your phone that called me." "It was," he admitted, "but I still had your number saved from the call log, and I've been thinking about it since." Turns out apologizing to a total stranger at midnight was the most interesting conversation I've had in a while. I hope that's not too strange to admit. Chloe sat down at her small kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, feeling a strange flutter she hadn't felt in a long time. "It's a little strange," she said, "but I don't mind strange." They talked for almost 2 hours that night. Daniel told her he worked as a structural engineer for a construction firm in Portland, that he had moved from Denver 2 years ago after a rough breakup, and that he had thrown himself into work because it was easier than sitting with silence. Chloe told him about her job proofreading manuscripts, about her dream of writing her own novel someday. A dream she kept mostly to herself because saying it out loud made it feel too fragile. Daniel didn't laugh at it. Instead, he asked her what her novel would be about. And when she hesitated, unsure, he simply said, "Whenever you're ready to tell me, I'll be here to listen." Over the following weeks, their conversations became a quiet ritual. They texted throughout the day about small, insignificant things. The terrible coffee at Daniel's job site, the manuscript Chloe was editing about a family of lighthouse keepers, the way autumn had begun creeping into the Portland air with the smell of wet leaves and cinnamon from the coffee shop below, Chloe's apartment. Neither of them rushed to meet in person. There was something delicate about the way their connection had begun. Born from a mistake neither of them had intended, and both seemed afraid that meeting too soon might shatter whatever fragile magic had formed between two strangers. On a wrong number. It was Daniel who finally suggested it, nearly a month after that first accidental call. "I know this is going to sound sudden," he said one evening on the phone, "but would you want to get dinner sometime? As in, actually see each other in person, not just voices on a screen?" Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that a lot." They chose a small Italian restaurant near the Willamette River, the kind of place with candlelit tables and old brick walls covered in ivy paintings. Chloe spent nearly an hour deciding what to wear, finally settling on a deep green sweater dress that made her feel like herself, not like someone performing a version of herself for a stranger. When she walked in and saw Daniel standing near the hostess stand, tall, dark-haired, wearing a gray button-down and a nervous smile, she felt an unexpected wave of familiarity, as though she already knew him, as though weeks of phone calls had somehow translated into recognition. "You look exactly like your voice," Daniel said, which made her laugh. "Is that a compliment?" "The best one I've got," he said, pulling out her chair. Dinner unfolded easily, filled with the same warmth that had colored their phone calls, but now layered with the added intimacy of shared glances, of Daniel's hand briefly touching hers across the table when he laughed too hard at one of her stories, of Chloe noticing the small dimple that appeared on his left cheek whenever he smiled. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation moving like water finding its natural course. When the night ended, Daniel walked her to her car, and for a long moment they stood there beneath a street lamp, neither wanting to be the one to say goodbye first. "I don't want this to be one dinner," Daniel finally said. "I want this to be the first of many." "Then let's make it the first of many," Chloe whispered. Their relationship deepened over the following months, blooming slowly and steadily the way things do when neither person is trying to rush toward an ending, but simply savoring the middle. Daniel met Chloe's best friend, Sarah, who interrogated him mercilessly over coffee, until she finally declared him annoyingly perfect for Chloe. Chloe met Daniel's mother, who hugged her tightly and told her son quietly in the kitchen that she hadn't seen him smile like that in years. They built a life together in small moments. Sunday mornings reading in comfortable silence, evenings cooking pasta from scratch because Daniel insisted store-bought sauce was a crime, weekend hikes along the Columbia River Gorge where Chloe would ramble about plot ideas for the novel she was, finally, tentatively beginning to write. But life, even good life, is rarely without its trials. 6 months into their relationship, Daniel received devastating news. His estranged father, whom he hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade, had suffered a severe stroke back in Denver. Despite their broken history, Daniel felt a duty to go, a complicated tangle of resentment and love pulling him back to a city he had left behind for a reason. Chloe offered to go with him, but Daniel, in a moment of stubborn self-protection, insisted on going alone. The 2 weeks he spent in Denver were the hardest of their relationship. Daniel grew distant on the phone, his voice hollow with exhaustion and grief, watching a man who had never been kind to him slowly relearn how to speak, how to move his right hand, how to simply exist in a diminished body. Chloe, feeling the distance stretch between them, wondered if this was where their story would end. Not with a dramatic fight, but with the quiet erosion that happens when two people drift under the weight of unspoken pain. She almost gave up. She almost decided that loving someone, through their hardest moment, was too much to ask of herself. But one night, staring at her phone, she remembered the first night they had spoken, the way Daniel had said, "Whenever you're ready to tell me, I'll be here to listen." She realized that love wasn't only about the easy moments. It was about showing up during the hard ones too. She booked a flight to Denver without telling him. She arrived at the hospital just as visiting hours were ending, exhausted from travel but determined. Daniel looked up from his chair beside his father's bed, disbelief washing over his tired face. "Chloe, what are you doing here?" "I know you said you wanted to do this alone," she said softly, "but I couldn't let you carry this by yourself anymore. You don't have to be strong all the time. Not with me." Daniel stood, crossed the small distance between them, and pulled her into an embrace so tight it nearly knocked the breath out of her. "I've never needed anyone the way I need you," he whispered into her hair. I was terrified to admit that. They stayed in Denver together for another week. Daniel's father, though still weak, slowly began to recover, and in a fragile, imperfect way, father and son began repairing what years of silence had broken. Chloe sat quietly through hospital visits, brought coffee, listened to Daniel's fears at 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. And in doing so, she became not just his girlfriend, but his anchor. When they finally returned to Portland, something between them had shifted permanently, deepened by the crisis they had weathered side by side. Daniel began talking about the future in ways he hadn't before. Not vague, someday plans, but specific, real ones. A year later, on the anniversary of that very first wrong number call, Daniel took Chloe to the same Italian restaurant where they had shared their first dinner. Over dessert, he reached into his pocket, his hands trembling slightly, and slid a small velvet box across the table. "I called the wrong number that night," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But somehow, I found exactly the right person. Chloe Bennett, will you marry me?" Chloe's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment before finally whispering, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They married the following spring in a small garden ceremony surrounded by cherry blossoms, close friends, and family who had watched their unlikely love story unfold with quiet amazement. Daniel's father, walking with the aid of a cane, but walking nonetheless, gave a short emotional toast about second chances in love, in family, in life itself. Chloe finally finished her novel that year too, a story about two strangers brought together by fate's smallest, most ordinary accident, dedicating it simply to Daniel, who dialed the wrong number and gave me the right life. Years later, when people asked how they met, Daniel would always smile and say, "I called the wrong number." And Chloe would squeeze his hand and finish, "And found the right man."